The Ukrainian Defense Forces have struck several Russian military and energy infrastructure facilities. The strikes targeted, in particular, several oil refineries and warehouses, and since the beginning of the day, 118 combat clashes have been recorded on the front line. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. More details about the situation on the battlefield are coming up next.
About 300 Russians are trying to reach the northern outskirts of Pokrovsk. According to the 7th Air Assault Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, in recent days Russian troops have intensified their attempts to penetrate the city. In particular, they have used light vehicles to enter through its southern outskirts. At the same time, they took advantage of weather conditions that significantly complicated the operation of drones. The defense forces continue to detect and destroy enemy groups, even in urban areas and under low visibility conditions. Since the beginning of November, 162 Russians have been eliminated in Pokrovsk and another 39 have been wounded. Various branches of the defense forces continue to be involved in clearing the city. Drone units, assault and air assault units, special operations forces, the Security Service of Ukraine, the National Guard, the National Police and others. And a message from the 7th Air Assault Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Telegram.
The operation is ongoing. To the north of Pokrovsk itself and in the northern part of the settlement, the armed forces of Ukraine have full control by the defense forces, because we know that here, as part of this defensive operation, our special forces are also conducting corresponding special operations in the southern part of Pokrovsk. There are neighborhoods where our units are operating, destroying that very logistics and carrying out certain clearing operations, targeting the Russian personnel who remain or are trying to remain there.
The 7th Air Assault Corps also showed footage of the destruction of a Russian ground robot that was delivering supplies to the occupiers. This happened near the settlement of Shevchenko, which is 5 kilometers south of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian defenders identified one of the enemy's logistical routes and remotely mined it. At the same time, fighting continues in the Pokrovsk direction. The enemy tried to advance near Stepnaya, Novoselovka, Borovskaya, Andreevka towards Petropavlovka and Novosinovo. On the Slavyansk section of the front, the Russians attempted to break through the Ukrainian defenses in the areas of Dronovka, Seversk, Serebryanka and Pereeznoye. And near Konstantinovka, the Russian army launched assault operations near the settlements of Belaya Gora, Sherbinovka, Pleshevka, Rusin Yar and towards Sofievka.
There are a number of settlements. For example, I'll mention Krasny Liman, the settlement of Rovnoye, and several others, well, economically significant ones, a few more settlements, the struggle for which, in my opinion, will actually determine the future fate of the city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration. And accordingly, if those gradual steps, yes, I understand that they are accompanied, including by significant strain on our forces, resources, and logistics. If we manage to carry out these steps, if the decisions being made today by the High Command are implemented, then things will not turn out. To put it mildly, not everything will go as, and today there is already evidence of this, not everything will happen as the Russian occupiers have planned. In
particular, the defense forces attacked the Orsnefteorg oil refinery in the Orenburg region, almost 1,500 kilometers from Ukraine. One of the primary oil processing units was hit. Local residents report intense flames and columns of smoke. The industrial zone is on fire. The flames can be seen from different parts of the city. It is known that the facility produces more than 30 types of petroleum products, including gasoline, diesel, aviation kerosene, and oils. Its design capacity exceeds 6 million tons of oil per year. Meanwhile, Special Operations Forces struck the Hvardievsky oil depot near the city of Saki and temporarily occupied Crimea. Ukrainian drones in particular hit a pumping station on the facility's grounds. The fighters note that this oil depot supplies fuel to Russian military facilities and transport. In total, in October, the Ukrainian Armed Forces aerial drone system struck about 77 targets. 1,000 Russian targets. These figures were announced by the Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. According to him, the best combat results were demonstrated by FPV drones and heavy bombers.
We are actively implementing ground-based robotic systems. With the expansion of kill zones, they are becoming an integral part of modern technological warfare. The primary objective of using ground-based robotic systems is to preserve the lives of personnel. In October, they delivered almost 300,000 kilograms of provisions to our units, evacuation of the wounded, mining and combat deployment. This is the current reality of their use on the front line. Alexander Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Facebook.
And in the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated another 1,020 Russian occupiers. Thus, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,153,000 personnel. In addition, Ukrainian fighters destroyed 1 armored vehicle, 17 artillery systems, 1 multiple launch rocket system, shot down 217 operational tactical UAVs, and destroyed 79 units of enemy automotive equipment.
The Russians fled Kherson thanks to the strength of the Ukrainians. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated this on the 3rd anniversary of the city's liberation. Kherson was liberated on November 11, 2022, after more than 8 months of Russian occupation. It is the only regional center that the Russian army was able to temporarily capture. However, Kherson endured thanks to the resistance of its local residents. People took to the streets in protest, and they believed in a swift liberation. 3 years later, the enemy continues to shell the city, delivering thousands of strikes and destroying residential buildings and infrastructure. Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized the need to strengthen the protection of both the population and roads, logistics, as well as critical facilities. And today there is
the decision regarding energy. Today there is also a decision regarding energy. Regarding equipment for Kherson and additional funding, these decisions must be made by the government at the level of the relevant ministers no later than tomorrow. The regional leadership has submitted requests for the needs of the communities in the region. This must be ensured for kindergartens, support for education, and all social needs. People here deserve greater support. I am grateful to everyone who protects our Kherson. They work here for the children so that the city and communities can function, so that life goes on. The least the state can do is show respect and gratitude.
One of the Russian drones that attacked Ukraine crashed on the territory of Romania in the northern part of Tulcea County. For the safety of the Sepele area, an investigation is underway, as reported by the Romanian Ministry of National Defense. They also noted that due to the massive attack on Ukrainian ports on the Danube, the air defense system was activated as a precaution. However, due to bad weather, the air police's combat aircraft were unable to take off. The Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the Russian shelling and announced the preparation of new sanctions.
These actions are part of a series of similar incidents and are a characteristic feature of the war of aggression that Russia is waging. This is also reflected in Russia's systematic provocations against the European Union and NATO. We will not hesitate to increase the price that Russia will pay for such reckless and illegal actions. Romania, the European Union, and the United States have imposed sanctions that have already had a significant impact, and we are preparing new restrictions and concrete measures that will inflict tangible damage on the aggressor. Oana Tsoiu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania, on the social network X.
Russia cannot be allowed to endlessly violate NATO's airspace. We must respond to provocations. This statement was made by the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel. He noted that through all its actions, the Kremlin demonstrates that it respects only strength. That is why the alliance should demonstrate its strength and at some point shoot down a Russian fighter jet. Pavel emphasized that he is not calling for Russian aircraft to be neutralized after every incident in the air, but if the need arises and Moscow continues its provocations, NATO will eventually have to take such a step so that the Russians understand there are rules that truly cannot be broken, the Czech president said. He also added that Russia itself, unlike the alliance, would not hesitate to shoot down an intruding aircraft in its own airspace.
There are countries to whom it's enough to say, don't do that, or there will be consequences. But for some, things really do have to end badly before they understand that this is not the way forward. The Russians are testing us today. They are not only checking how the air defense systems of individual countries work, how NATO's integrated air defense system operates, but also how determined we really are to defend our own security. Petr Pavel, President of the Czech Republic, during a visit to the Karlovy Vary region.
Russian propaganda is actively spreading the FSB's statement that it allegedly foiled a special operation by Ukraine and the United Kingdom to organize a so-called provocation in a NATO country. According to the FSB, the Ukrainians supposedly planned to recruit a Russian pilot to hijack a MiG-31 aircraft with a Kinzhal missile and carry out sabotage at the largest NATO base in Romania. However, The Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine denied this information and stated that such fake news, as they call them, are regularly spread by Russians in order to intimidate Western countries with the supposed dangers of supporting Ukraine. This is also part of the Kremlin's efforts to reduce military aid to Kyiv.
The spread of such false accusations is a typical tactic of the Russian special services. Previously, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service and its head, Sergei Narishkin, have repeatedly disseminated sensational exposés. Allegedly, Ukraine, together with the United Kingdom, are preparing bloody provocations in the Baltic Sea, Poland, and other NATO countries. But after many failures and a crisis of trust in this agency, it is now the FSB, headed by another longtime Putin ally, Alexander Bortnikov, that has begun voicing such lies. From a statement by the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine,
Brazil is reducing its dependence on Russian diesel fuel. According to official data, since the beginning of 2023, the country has paid Russia more than $13.5 billion for diesel fuel. But now Russia's share in Brazil's diesel imports has dropped several times over. If in the first 6 months of this year it was 60%, by October it was only 17%. Among the reasons for the decline, experts cite increased costs for the shadow fleet due to sanctions, as well as a diesel fuel shortage within Russia itself caused by refinery shutdowns. One of the largest Chinese oil refining companies has started to refuse purchasing Russian oil. This was reported by Reuters, citing a new tender for the period from December to mid-February. The company regularly purchased oil from Russia, usually receiving one shipment per month. At the same time, refusals to buy Russian raw materials are becoming increasingly common. In particular, as Bloomberg reports, the 5 largest Indian refineries, which account for 2/3 of all Russian oil imports, have not placed a single order for December. Ordinary deals for the following month are usually closed by the 10th. But this time there wasn't a single one. Moreover, oil prices plummeted during Asian trading despite an oversupply. There is no demand due to the impact of U.S. sanctions on Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil. The Russian oil industry is under a double blow. On one hand, oil producers are forced to look for new buyers because previous importers are refusing deliveries due to U.S. sanctions. At the same time, on the domestic market, it is impossible to process the oil. The largest Russian refineries are simply shut down after attacks by Ukrainian drones. This is one of the deepest crises in the industry, which brings in about a quarter of the federal budget's revenue. My colleague Larisa Petruk will continue on this topic. On the
night of November 11th, Ukrainian defense forces once again attacked the Saratov oil refinery. The plant produces gasoline and fuel oil, diesel fuel, technical sulfur, and also supplies its products to the Russian army. After a series of explosions, a large fire broke out at the facility. In all likelihood, this is already the 5th attack on the Saratov oil refinery since the beginning of autumn. Previously, it was struck on November 3rd, October 16th, September 20th, and September 16th. The Saratov refinery specializes in the production of gasoline, diesel fuel, fuel oil, and more than 20 other types of petroleum products. From a Deutsche Welle publication. On November 11th, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine also confirmed the strike on the oil refinery in the Orenburg region. This facility produces more than 30 types of petroleum products, including gasoline, diesel fuel, aviation kerosene, and oils. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the plant's design processing capacity is over 6.5 million tons of oil per year. However, the geography of Ukrainian strikes was not limited to Saratov and Orenburg. The Feodosia Oil Marine Terminal in Crimea was also hit, a key hub for supplying fuel and lubricants by sea to the Crimean Peninsula and the temporarily occupied territories in southern Ukraine. There were confirmed strikes on storage tanks at the facility. The extent of the damage caused is being clarified. In addition, in the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region, a logistics supply warehouse of the Russian occupiers in Donetsk and a concentration of personnel near Ocheretine were hit. From reports of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Telegram. Now practically every day. At present, Ukraine is effectively using its long-range sanctions against Russia on a daily basis. And every day we have a clear result in the form of reduced Russian capabilities. Russia must lose, and this is truly a peacekeeping tactic. I want to thank everyone who is working to provide Ukraine with these capabilities. and of course our warriors for their accuracy. The long-range strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces have several negative consequences for Russia at once. First, the aggressor's army is deprived of an important resource, fuel, without which it is impossible to conduct active military operations. Second, the crisis intensifies both within the Federation itself and in the Ukrainian territories temporarily occupied by Russia. And combined with inflation, this leads to a rapid increase in prices.
Gasoline continues to become more expensive at record rates, 0.8. Almost a 1% increase per week, and this has been going on for several weeks now, 11% since the beginning of the year. So the government is frantically trying to take some measures to keep gasoline prices in check. There is a significant, very significant loss of capacity for gasoline, and partly for primary processing and diesel production as well, all these prices. They keep rising and there's no end in sight.
What cannot be processed domestically is becoming increasingly difficult for the Kremlin to sell abroad. American sanctions are distancing Moscow from its last remaining partners, Beijing and New Delhi. US sanctions have already slashed Russian oil exports by sea by about 20%. For example, in October, around 3.6 million barrels were shipped daily from Russian ports. 1,000 barrels of oil, but in just the first week after the sanctions were announced, according to Bloomberg, these volumes dropped to about 3 million barrels per day. And things could get even worse. 5 Indian refineries, which together accounted for about 65% of Russia's seaborne oil exports to India, have already put their planned December oil purchases on hold. At the same time, it's impossible to sell the oil on the global market, and within Russia, there's nowhere left to process it because Ukrainian drones have bombed the largest refinery. From a publication by Novaya Gazeta Europe, strikes on oil refineries have caused Russia more damage than international sanctions, according to Kirilo Budanov, head of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense. According to various estimates, the damage to the aggressor country has already exceeded $100 billion.